I stared at a spreadsheet for 20 minutes the night I figured this out, and I genuinely thought I'd made an error. I ran the numbers 3 times. I even called David, my neighbor who's forgotten more about money than I've ever learned, and read the cells to him over the phone. He laughed and said, "Tom, I told you this 2 years ago. You just didn't believe me until you saw the spreadsheet." Here's what it showed. If you invest $500 a month at the stock market's historical average, it takes about 7 years to save your first $60,000. Brutal, slow, thankless years where it feels like nothing is happening. Then it takes roughly 22 more years to go from 60,000 to 1 million. But here's the part that broke my brain. Of that final $1 million, you only personally contributed about 173,000. The other 827,000 came from compound growth on the money you'd already saved. Your money made more than 4 times what you put in. And the turning point, the exact moment the math shifted from you doing the work to your money doing the work, was $60,000. My name is Tom. I reached financial independence not because I had a huge salary or some genius strategy. I got there because someone showed me this number, and I believed it enough to keep going when everything in me wanted to quit. Subscribe if you want the actual mechanics behind building wealth, because this video is about the most important number in personal finance that nobody talks about. You've probably heard the quote that the first $100,000 is the hardest. Charlie Munger said it, Warren Buffett's partner. And he's not wrong, but he's not precise either. Munger was a billionaire talking to other billionaires. For regular people investing regular amounts, the real inflection point isn't 100,000, it's 60,000. And the reason is pure math. When you have $60,000 invested and the market returns its historical average of about 10% a year, your portfolio generates roughly $6,000 in growth over the next 12 months. $6,000. If you're saving $500 a month, that's also $6,000 a year in contributions. Your money's annual growth just matched your annual effort. Think about what that means. At $60,000, you effectively hired a second worker. That worker earns exactly as much as you save each year, never takes a sick day, never negotiates for a raise, and reinvests every cent it earns so that next year it earns even more. Below $60,000, you're carrying the load alone. Above it, you have a partner, and that partner gets stronger every single year while your contributions stay the same. At $100,000, your money earns $10,000 a year while you're still putting in $6,000. It's already out-earning you by 67%. At $200,000, your money generates $20,000 a year, making more than 3 times your contributions. At $500,000, your money earns $50,000 in a good year. You and your $500 a month are almost irrelevant at that point. The portfolio has taken over. And that cascading acceleration, that moment where the curve bends from painful to parabolic, starts at 60,000. Not 100, not 250, 60. I think about the road from 0 to a million in 3 distinct phases, and understanding which phase you're in changes everything about how you should feel and what you should focus on. Phase 1 is 0 to 60,000. This is the grind phase. It's the hardest stretch, and not because the math is complicated. It's hard because the results are invisible. You save $500 a month, and after a year, you've got about $6,300 in the account. The market might add another $300 or $400 on top. You look at that balance and compare it to $1 million, and your brain tells you this is pointless. Everyone quits in phase 1. Almost nobody quits after it. David told me something during this phase that I come back to constantly. He said, "Tom, you're not saving money right now. You're building a machine. The machine doesn't work yet because it's not finished. But once it's finished, it runs on its own. You don't judge a half-built engine for not starting." That reframe kept me going in year 2 when my balance hit $14,000 and I just watched a coworker buy a $45,000 truck. $14,000 looked pathetic next to that truck. But that truck was losing value every day, and my $14,000 was slowly, quietly, building the machine that would eventually make me rich. Phase 2 is $60,000 to $200,000. This is where you feel the turn. Your portfolio starts posting gains that actually look like real money. A good month adds $2,000 or $3,000. A good year adds $15,000 or $20,000 on top of your contributions. Your annual statements stop looking like a savings account and start looking like something that's alive. The psychological shift in phase 2 is massive. You stop checking your balance out of anxiety and start checking it out of curiosity. You stop thinking about what you're giving up and start thinking about where this is going. Phase 2 is also where the compounding curve starts to visibly bend. It took 7 years to go from 0 to 60. It takes roughly 8 more years to go from 60 to 200,000. You're covering more than twice the distance in roughly the same amount of time. That's the curve starting to bend. Phase 3 is 200,000 to 1 million. This is the compounding phase, and it's where your money completely takes over the project. At 200,000, the market is generating 20,000 a year on your balance. Your 6,000 in annual contributions now represents less than a quarter of the total growth. You're a passenger. The machine David told me to build is now running, and it's running fast. From 200,000 to 500,000 takes about 8 years. From 500,000 to a million takes about 6.5. Look at what just happened. The last 500,000 of your million, the biggest single chunk, took less time than the first 60,000. Let me say that differently. The final $500,000 is easier to get than the first 60,000. That sounds wrong. It sounds like I'm lying. But compound interest doesn't care what sounds right. It just runs the math. So if 60,000 is this magical turning point that leads to a million, why do most Americans never get there? The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances shows that the median retirement account balance for Americans under 35 is about $19,000. For Americans 35 to 44, it's roughly $45,000. The median person in their early 40s hasn't even reached the threshold where their money starts pulling its own weight. And many of the ones who have technically reached it have it sitting in a 401k they've been contributing to for 15 years without ever understanding why that specific threshold matters. There are 3 things that kill the journey to 60,000, and none of them are about income. Start with interruption. People begin investing, get to 8 or 12 or 20,000, then something happens. A job loss, a car accident, a medical bill, a divorce. They raid the account, reset to 0, and now they're back at the start of phase 1, with even less motivation than the first time. This is exactly why I spent a whole video on the $8,000 cash buffer. That buffer exists to protect your investment account from life's interruptions. $8,000 in a savings account is the bodyguard that keeps your 60,000 goal alive. Then there's impatience, which is harder to fight because it's psychological. The early years of investing are genuinely boring. Your account goes from $12,000 to $12,400 in a month, and you think, what's the point? Meanwhile, your friend just flipped $3,000 into $9,000 on some crypto trade and won't shut up about it. The temptation to abandon the slow path for the fast one is enormous, and it's designed to be. Every brokerage app, every financial influencer selling options courses, every crypto exchange is monetizing your impatience. They need you to believe that slow wealth building is for suckers, because their business model depends on you trading, not holding. David has a line about this that I love. He says, "The people who get rich slowly stay rich. The people who get rich fast usually get poor faster." His parents came to this country with almost nothing and built a 7-figure net worth over 30 years. No trades, no flips, no schemes. Just $500, then $750, then $1,000 a month into index funds, every month for 3 decades. Boring saved their family. And the quietest killer of all is lifestyle creep that prevents the gap from existing in the first place. You get a raise from $60,000 to $70,000, and instead of investing the difference, you move into a nicer apartment and upgrade your car. Your margin stays exactly where it was. Your path to $60,000 doesn't accelerate at all. You just made someone else richer. I watch this happen to people I know every single year. They're earning more than ever and investing the same as always, because every raise gets absorbed by a slightly upgraded life. The $600 apartment becomes $900. The paid-off Honda becomes a financed Kia. The home-cooked dinners become DoorDash 3 times a week. Each upgrade feels tiny, but they compound in reverse, the same way investments compound forward, except lifestyle creep compounds against you. So let's talk about how to actually get to $60,000 faster. Because the sooner you cross that line, the sooner your money starts carrying its own weight. Start with what I call rate stacking, which is the single most powerful accelerator. Most people invest a fixed amount and never change it. They set up a $500 monthly transfer and forget it. That's fine, but it's slow. Rate stacking means that every time your income increases by any amount, you immediately increase your investment by at least half of that amount before your lifestyle has a chance to absorb it. You get a $2,000 annual raise, $1,000 of it goes to your monthly investment. Your side gig brings in an extra $300 a month for a few months, $150 goes straight to the brokerage. The principle is simple. Never let your savings rate stay flat when your income is rising. Most people's investment rate is a fixed number. The people who cross $60,000 fastest make it a fixed percentage of a rising number. Then there's what David calls the windfall funnel. Tax refunds, bonuses, cash gifts, the random check from that class action lawsuit you forgot you signed up for. Most people treat windfalls as found money and spend them on something fun. David's family treats every windfall as a lump sum contribution to the portfolio. His dad got a $2,000 tax refund every year for 20 years and put every single one directly into his index fund. Those 20 deposits alone, completely separate from his monthly investing, grew to over $126,000 by the time he retired. $2,000 a year in money most people would blow on a weekend trip turned into a 6-figure account by itself. And the most uncomfortable accelerator, the one that actually moved the needle fastest for me, is attacking your single largest expense. For most people, that's housing. When my wife and I were trying to get to $60,000 in investments, we made a decision that our friends thought was insane. We moved from a 2-bedroom apartment at $1,600 a month to a 1-bedroom at $1,100, even though we had a toddler. We put our daughter's crib in the living room and turned the bedroom into a combination sleeping area and home office. It was cramped. It was not Instagram worthy. But that $500 a month went straight into our brokerage account and cut almost 2 years off our timeline to $60,000. We stayed in that 1-bedroom for 3 years. By the time we moved to a bigger place, our portfolio had crossed $70,000, and the compounding engine was already running. I'm not saying you have to live in a shoebox. I'm saying that temporary discomfort in your housing situation is the single fastest legal way to accelerate your savings rate, and most people won't even consider it. I want to tell you what actually changes in your life once you cross $60,000, because the math transformation is only half the story. The most immediate change is fear. When your investment account is at $3,000, every market dip feels like a personal attack. You see the balance drop $200 and your stomach clenches. At $60,000, a 10% market correction knocks $6,000 off your balance, which is a bigger absolute number, but somehow it bothers you less. Because you've watched the balance recover before, you've seen it dip and come back stronger. And you know, in your bones, not just your brain, that the market's temporary moods don't change the long-term trajectory. You develop what I call financial calm, and you cannot buy it or fake it. It only comes from having watched your own money survive a downturn and grow through it. Then your relationship with your job starts to shift. At zero savings, you need your job the way you need oxygen. You'll tolerate anything, a terrible boss, meaningless work, a toxic culture, because quitting means financial catastrophe. At $60,000 invested, you're not free yet, but the math starts. The portfolio is generating $6,000 a year on its own. That's not quit your job money, but it's survive for a few months money if you add in your cash buffer. You start to feel a floor underneath you where there used to be nothing. Your negotiating power at work quietly increases because the desperation leaves your voice. People can sense when you need the job versus when you choose the job. And the people who choose tend to get treated better. And the deepest change, the one that actually determines whether you make it to $1 million or stall out at 100, is momentum. Below 60,000, every month requires an act of willpower. You are choosing to invest instead of spend, and that choice feels like sacrifice. Once you cross 60,000, the portfolio's growth starts to feel inevitable. It adds money even in months when you can't contribute as much. A medical bill eats your budget in March, and you can only invest $200 instead of $500, but the portfolio still grew by $400 on its own. That psychological shift from, I have to push this, to, it's already moving, is the difference between people who invest for 3 years and quit versus people who invest for 30 years and become millionaires. 60,000 is where the quitting stops, because the evidence becomes undeniable. Your money is working. You can see it. And once you can see it, you never want to stop. I'll leave you with one more piece of math that Paul, my other neighbor, the retired guy with the dog hair Subaru, shared with me over coffee last year. He said the journey from 0 to 60 took him about 5.5 years because he was aggressive about it. The journey from 60 to his final number took another 19 years. But in those 19 years, his portfolio generated over $560,000 in growth that he never had to earn, never had to work for, and never had to sacrifice for. He said, "Tom, every month of those first 5.5 years bought me roughly $8,500 in future gains. I just couldn't see it at the time." That's what the first 60,000 is. It's not a savings goal. It's a purchase. You're buying a machine that manufactures wealth for the rest of your life. And the price of the machine is $60,000 and about 5 to 7 years of patience. Everybody in the comments right now, tell me where you are. Below 60? Above it? Just starting? I don't care what the number is. I just want to know where you are so I can tell you what the math looks like from here. And if you want to understand the exact account structure I use to automate everything I talked about today so that none of it requires willpower, that video is linked right here. I'll see you in the next one.